web services and how to do development against Link Online, because Exchange Web Services will be the major part of the presentation. My name is Albert.
And my name is Robin Thomas.
And we work on the Unified Communications team, in the Exchange team, and in the Link team. Actually, I work on marketing. He's a program manager. And we are going to talk today about what are the things to realize when you do development against Office 365. And Robin, you start.
Great. Thank you for joining us. We realize that 8:30 a.m. An API talk is not the most exciting thing to be at, so congratulations to you guys for making it here. As Albert said, I'm a program manager on the Exchange Web Services team, focusing on third-party developer outreach. So all of our partners, both with inside Microsoft and then external companies who are building on top of Exchange using web services, I work with. So for those of you who aren't new to Exchange development, by the way, this room feels incredibly weird because I have two people over here and a bunch of people over here, and so I'm not neglecting you. I'm going to try and remember to shift back and forth. For those of you who are not new to Exchange development, you're going to say another API yet again, and yes, it's true, and we're not going to belabor this slide, but every time we introduce a new API, people sigh and they say, oh, not another one. And the point I make is that never before have more products, both Microsoft products and external products, been built on top of this API than ever before. So even if we wanted to change it, we can't. We're stuck. So take a bet on web services, and we won't rip the rug out from underneath you. If you are moving from previous APIs, working with Exchange, anything from CDOEX, WebDAV, any of the legacy, what we now, in the Exchange 2010 timeframe, we refer to as legacy, all of those legacy APIs have a migration path. Most of them go through EWS. The transport delivery events do replace some of that functionality. But the key is, if you're focusing on Exchange Online development, none of these protocols work against that. So any of the issues with firewalls and proxies, these protocols quickly fall apart. Web services is the way to go for that behavior. Brief chart. Basically every scenario that was supported with any of the previous APIs is supported and more so on EWS. The only problem is we don't have support for Exchange 2003. A year ago, 2 years ago, that was a much bigger deal when Exchange 2003 had such significant market share. Today we see the momentum and the migration velocity going to Exchange 2010, so we don't see this as much of an issue anymore. So in 2010, we really talk about three different ways of interacting with Exchange. We talk about content, we talk about management, and we talk about control. And content is really about getting data in and out of the mailbox, getting data in and out of Active Directory. It's about the data you kind of expect. When you look at an Outlook and you see your contacts, your calendar, what we call the PIM data, that's all mailbox content. PowerShell APIs are really the tool to manage and configure Exchange. So if you're talking about accepted domains or recipient policies or anything that's configuration management oriented, those are going to be done through PowerShells. And then the transport APIs manage the flow of content. The first two, Exchange Web Services and PowerShell, both are supported in Exchange Online. So any of the Exchange Web Service code you have running today or any of the PowerShell scripts that you have running will work in the same way against Exchange Online. Primary focus of this talk is going to be Exchange Web Services. And so when we talk about Exchange Web Services, we really are talking about three things. We're talking about a rich experience, and that's talking about full client functionality. So the Mac Outlook product, which was rebranded from Entourage, is built entirely on top of Exchange Web Services. So the full breadth of that API will give you the ability to do a full client replacement, whether you want to do the entire PIM breadth of functionality, or you're just focused on a subset of functionality. The client APIs will let you do that. One of the other really valuable things that Exchange offers is a consistent business logic across Outlook. If you've ever done any kind of MAPI programming, any kind of calendaring programming, you realize how hard it can be to get that logic right and to get it consistent. Through Exchange Web Services, we're going to make sure that that consistency is done for you. So when you ask Exchange and say, give me this meeting and give me the third recurrence of it, or give me an exception of it, we're going to use the same business logic that Outlook's going to be using. Now, Outlook is all implemented client-side in MAPI, so trying to do that yourself in client-side MAPI has led to notorious headaches and frustrations. But in Exchange Web Services, We let you guys focus on what you want to build, and we'll take care of the back-end business logic. We also talk about easy to use. So web services, of course, are .NET friendly, they're Java friendly. Most of the major runtime frameworks today support web services. Within .NET, we have what we call our managed API, which is a client-side wrapper on top of the SOAP proxies that we support. So there's nothing fancy in the client side other than it's just a usability improvement. So for those who need to do rapid development or don't have a narrow focus on performance or a narrow focus on specific functionality, the client APIs are the way to go for that. And I'll show some demos of that and some sample code a little bit later. We've also extended that client-side wrapper for a Java runtime. So if you're doing Java development, that's available as well. The other thing we talk about is it being online ready. So the code that you're writing, if you're writing to applications that are going to work on premise, that same code is going to work against Exchange Online with no differences. So if you're an ISV and you're building applications and your customers may have on-premise deployments or they may have cloud deployments, you can write the same code and it's going to work in both places. If you're an in-house software developer and you're building an application, but you know in a few years your company is going to move to the cloud and maybe a hybrid deployment where some is going to stay on-prem and some is going to stay in the cloud, that same code is going to work moving forward. Of course, there's many types of applications you can build with Exchange Web Services. We see 3 buckets of types of applications emerging. One is that client application that I referenced. These are things like Mac Outlook. These are solutions. Really any kind of solution where it's a single user logging onto their mailbox, whether it's the full breadth of an Outlook clone or whether it's a very narrow focused part of an industry-specific workflow. It could be email clients, it could be IM, and even mobile devices obviously are becoming much more prevalent. We also see a lot of portal applications. If you're familiar with Microsoft's partnership with ePals, ePals is a university solution that's built to give, sorry, not university, I think it's K through 12, students for portal action to Exchange Web Services and the back end. So they're going to augment that data with data from the schools, but they're going to overlay that with maybe a course scheduled in the calendar, maybe a contact list that has other students in the class. We also see things like room availability, obviously, and course management. The other type of application we see are what we call service applications or line of business apps. And these are any of these sort of run in the background process to integrate Exchange data with any of your other systems. The classic example is a CRM or a back office system. On my website, maybe I direct my customers to click on sales or info@domain.com, and that gets dumped into a mailbox. I could have a tool that's basically mining that mailbox, pulling out the data, and automatically assigning it to salespeople as leads. And then when they close it in the CRM system, you can mark it closed all the way up the pipe back into Exchange. When we talk about development choices, because Exchange Web Services is built using standard SOAP web services today, you really have 3 different choices. If your application or your application framework can support raw HTTP request and response, you can actually handcraft the exact same SOAP messages that are going to go on the wire that any of the other options would provide you. So if you don't have any of the .NET runtimes or the Java runtimes or any of the other web service-friendly runtimes, you can craft the messages yourself. 100% cross-platform, you're never going to have a runtime problem, but you have no client-side logic, and you spend a lot of time manually plumbing and crafting that request and then parsing the response. Slightly better option is the auto-generated proxies. Any of the frameworks that support web services are going to support this type of coding, and this is basically a on-demand classes that get built based on the WSDL. So when you set up your development environment, you'll point it to the web services, the Exchange Web Services WSDL. It'll download all the class definitions and basically build this class library for you. This is great because it actually gets you good compile time checking, but you don't get any client-side logic and you don't get any client-side checks. So the request is going to go to the server. Whether it's a good request or not, it just meant that it compiled. The server may still kick it back and say this doesn't work for whatever reason. The best option is what we call our AWS managed APIs or our client APIs. And these are supported in both .NET and Java. As you can see, the amount of code it took to go from writing a raw HTTP SOAP message down to a single line of code for the .manage API, it's pretty clear that this is where the value is. We built this thinking that we would end up targeting the smaller to mid-sized developers who didn't really care about getting knee-deep into the code and didn't really want to be worried about every single tiny aspect of the code. And we're finding that even the big development shops are moving to this. At the end of the day, you've got options. So whatever framework you're working with, you can pick the one that works best for you. So that's kind of the background of EWS and what's available today and what you can do with it. And what I'd like to do is focus on a couple of sort of the key things that either we think is important to share with you or common functionality asks that we get or how-to asks that we get. The biggest one is auto-discover. When to use it? Why do I use it? Do I have to use it? And the reality is auto-discover is going to be the key of getting connected to Exchange. In the old days of client-server programming, you would have to hard code in that server URL, and you would say, okay, my server is X, and I'm either going to store that in a config file, or I'm going to have to build a custom version of it. Maybe I'll store it in Active Directory, and I'll have to read it out of Active Directory. But the reality is that gets cumbersome to manage, and it's prone to errors. Auto-discover is going to give you the URL that you need to connect to based on an email address. And I'll show you sample code of what that means. In practice, the auto-discover variability is I can outline it in this diagram pretty easily. So if I have an application that's connecting outside the firewall, that potentially is going to have a different URL that client needs to connect to. Maybe my public namespace is different than what my internal clients connect to. From an application, that at runtime, it's not when the application is built, and it's not when the client is set up the first time, but as an ongoing process, that client is going to query auto-discover, and it's going to say, today, for this session, where should I connect? So a client on the outside may get a different answer than a client on the inside. If a client on the inside is going to connect, it all depends on what site they're connecting in, where their mailbox data is. So as these complexities increase, auto-discover is still going to be the one place that you go to get answers for that particular user based on where their data is. For Exchange Online, as part of our load balancing and management story, URLs are going to change all the time. So taking a bet on one URL is a recipe for disaster. So we're really saying that a successful online application is going to use auto-discover. And we're saying even in on-premise deployments, being locked into a URL is just kind of a ticking time bomb until you decide you want to do an upgrade or you need to change the namespace. So really get in the habit of using auto-discover. And that's how easy it is. So in the client API, it's going to take you a single line of code to get the Exchange URL based on an email address. And I'll walk through exactly what it means to take this email address and turn it into a URL. Now, of course, you can be more complicated with auto-discover. If I need to, maybe I'm an application that's going to manage mailboxes for a whole bunch of different people. Those people could all have different URLs. And maybe I want something more than just the external EWS URL. Maybe I need the display name. Maybe I need any number of properties that Exchange will return as part of the mailbox configuration. I can certainly get into those and be very explicit about these are the 5 users that I want data for, and this is the data I want. So let's walk through an auto-discover sample, and we'll kind of talk about what's going on behind the scenes. So basically, I have an app here, and it's just a clear up some of this window.
Just uncheck this one. Yeah.
All right. So what this app is doing is it's basically going to look up an account I have in Exchange Online. So this is working against live servers out on the internet. And the URL, the email address is hard-coded. It's robint@dweebs.com. And what it's going to do is it's first going to say, OK, I'm in a I'm connected to a domain. And this is because I logged on to a corporate domain. So auto-discover has touch points within Active Directory that says, hey, just give me the auto-discover servers for this deployment, and then I can make sure I get the right one. And I don't know what happened here. Oh, looks like it's still going. OK, so it's going to query what we call SCP records, and it's going to say, do I have an SCP record for the domain that I'm asking for? try this again. Sorry, I have a feeling this is not.
Yeah, I can already tell you that there is a network issue, so we cannot get properly out of the network.
Oh, nope, it is going. Okay.
Here it goes. Okay.
All right, so what happens is it basically queried Active Directory and did I just kill it? That's what I get for being impatient. All right, so what it did is it basically queried Active Directory and said, do I have any SCP records? And no, I logged into the Microsoft corporate domain, it knows nothing about dweebs.com. So it's actually going to go out to the internet, and this is really where the power of Autodiscover is. It's going to look at dweebs.com, and it's going to say, is there a DNS record for autodiscover.dweebs.com? And if yes, go try that. And through redirects and Autodiscover CNAMEs, we can basically make sure that that gets you to the right endpoint that can either redirect to another Autodiscover endpoint or answer the request itself. And so if Albert has, are you in the cloud? Is your corporate mailbox in the cloud?
Not yet.
Great. My mailbox is in the cloud. So when I log on, I actually use robint@service.exchange.microsoft.com, which is different than Albert's email address. So when I do Autodiscover, my email address is actually going to route me to a completely different URL using nothing more than that domain name than the endpoint that Albert will get. And so what that actually looks like is, so we basically, the SCP checks say, yep, I know nothing about this domain, so I'm going to send you out to the internet. And so what we do here is we basically make that request and we say, I'm looking for that email address. Here's the settings I'm after. And the response we get is right here. So we basically say, in Exchange Online, of course, the internal EWS URL isn't available, but we do give back the external EWS URL. In some of the more complex deployments, you might see redirects from a hybrid deployment model. Obviously, DNS can only point to one spot, so it'll point to the on-premise server, and then the on-premise server will say, your mailbox is in the cloud, I can redirect you there. But the reality is that Autodiscover sort of encapsulates all of that for you, so you guys really don't need to worry about anything more than what user are you trying to get connected. One of the other value adds that Exchange really exposes through web services is the availability service. If you guys have used Outlook 2010, you know about finding a conference room or scheduling a meeting with people. We've sort of evolved this, what used to be a public folder-based FreeBusy system where Outlook would routinely publish data to a public folder and then different things would query the public folder, and that had its own set of issues. Now, every user's availability is stored within their data, where the calendar is. And so the availability service is actually going to query all the mailboxes and pull that FreeBusy data, so you get the most up-to-date FreeBusy data. You're not worried about lag or any of the issues that were previously associated with public folders. And in addition, we provided things like meeting time suggestion. So if I need to meet with Albert, and I don't really care when I meet with him, I just know I need to do it in the next 2 days, I can say, I want to meet with Albert, and I want to meet with Joe. Albert's required, and Joe's optional, and it's an hour meeting. Give me the suggestions. Exchange will actually spit back and say, here's the next time slot where you're both fit. Here's one where only Albert fits, and I'll show you a demo of that. The other thing we can do is talk about or show the different working hours. So Albert could say, I only work 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., where somebody else is a late starter, so maybe he works 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. But you can get all that data back within that availability service request. And optionally, users can choose to expose more data through their FreeBusy, so that when I query Albert's FreeBusy data, I might not only get that he's busy at this time, he might actually tell me what he's doing at that time, so I can say, I know that's not important, I'll go ahead and schedule that for him anyway. What does it look like to make an availability service request? Well, hopefully you guys agree that it looks extremely easy. You set up your attendees, you can specify whether they're required or optional, and that'll all factor into the score that we give back for all of these meeting time suggestions. You set up a time window, and then you simply query Exchange Web Services, and it's going to give you back those suggestions. So we've got a good demo that sort of walks through that. And again, this is going to use Autodiscover to go look up my endpoint, and we'll see how the network is doing here. This application is built entirely using Exchange Web Services as the data transport with WPF. So there's no Outlook controls, there's no Outlook logic running. It's pure Exchange Web Services.
It's not on the screen.
Oh, thank you.
Well, then you can see the delay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And if that doesn't come back up, I'll switch to a backup real quick. What you're going to see here is I'm going to pull up my own calendar. It's going to give me a great view of my own calendar. Exchange Web Services provides what we call a calendar view, so I don't need to worry about parsing the different properties to define what that calendar view is. I can simply say, give me my own calendar for the next 5 days, or give me a week view. Okay? And so what this is doing, and this is saying, you actually got to redirect to a different AutoDiscover endpoint. And this is because by nature, AutoDiscover goes over HTTP. And in Exchange Online, we actually force a redirect to SSL. So that's expected. You can actually handle that in code if you want to. So now it's actually connecting with Exchange Online, and depending on where my mailbox is around the world, it's sorting out what that endpoint should be. So it's sucking down data, and it's going to paint a picture of what my week looks like. And it does feel like the network is extremely sluggish. OK, so again, no client-side logic. This is all Exchange data being pulled down and displayed. And let's go ahead and look at John's mailbox. And so again, I'm going to query somebody else's mailbox and pull down their data. Now, John has given me rights to his calendar data. So again, I can see exactly what he's doing. It looks like he has some of the same meetings I do, but of course he has different meetings as well. And let's take a look at what somebody who hasn't shared their data with me looks like. And I'm not doing anything fancy in the client side. This is the data that Exchange is sending back. I'm just simply displaying it. So Exchange is managing the rights. Exchange is managing what data I need to obfuscate, what data I should let bleed through. All right, so we know these three people look relatively free. Let's go ahead and schedule a meeting. And we're going to add John. We're going to add Susan. And so this is using the meeting suggestion time feature I talked about. And so over the next week, which only has 2 more I'm showing the week or the work week, so it only has 2 more days. It's going to basically bring back all of the time slots, and it's going to give me a score. And we've just color-coded what that score is here, but it's going to give me a score based on whether I selected required versus optional, how many people of the total number of people are available during that time. So I could quickly look and say, oh, OK, everybody's free at 10:30. I could go ahead and schedule a meeting at that time. But I've decided, you know what, I really need to schedule something at 3. And I can clearly see here in the bottom right that John and I are available, but Susan's not available. And let's say 4 p.m. Works good. So we're going to go ahead and schedule that meeting. Now, Exchange also offers the ability to manage resource rooms or conference rooms. So had I set up some mailboxes as conference rooms, I could have optionally shown what conference rooms are available at that time as well. So again, very little client-side logic running. We let the developers focus on the user experience they want to build, and we'll worry about the back-end business logic for managing user availability. So again, you can see the meetings popped up my calendar, and this is the exact same view that I would see if I was in OA or Outlook.
And by the way, this demo is on the VHD that we actually shipped, right? So there is a VHD under Microsoft.com/VHD, and you can actually get this demo. There will be a new set of developer VHDs for UC, and that will have the code as well.
The only other thing I'll show is the different views. Obviously, using the Exchange calendar view, you can decide whether you want to show a work week or a day, and then scroll through exactly as you would expect to do. All right. Sometimes you need to access mailbox that isn't your own, so Exchange has a couple of options for that. We support what we call delegate access and application impersonation. If you're familiar with the Outlook usage model, that's the delegate access model where Albert and I do a lot of business together, so I've actually shared out my calendar with Albert. So when he looks at my calendar, he can see very specific data about what's going on. but it's me accessing Albert's mailbox using, or excuse me, Albert's calendar folder using my credentials, whereas the application impersonation is more like a service account access, where I'm going to configure service account access to everybody within this department, maybe everybody within this company. You can, using RBAC, you can define a scope exactly who can this service account access. But the key is what credentials are being used to access the data, and then who the action is performed on. So if I were accessing Albert's mailbox, I would be using my own credentials, and that would show up as me accessing Albert's mailbox. So if I were to send mail, let's say Albert gave me send rights to his mailbox. I could send from him, but it would actually show up as me sending on behalf of him. Whereas if I had application impersonation rights to Albert's mailbox, I would be able to send mail as though I were Albert. Application impersonation, I'm going to dive into a little bit more because I think that's a little bit more interesting from a line of business or a third-party software developer perspective. If I need to do any kind of, like I said, doing data or doing acts as though I were Albert, I would want to use application impersonation. And if I need to manage a large set of mailboxes using one service account or a limited number of service accounts, application impersonation would be the way to go. Obviously, asking users for their username and password as a way to log onto their mailbox works in some limited scenarios, but it really doesn't work in most cases. So let's walk through exactly what application impersonation looks like. So I have a client out there, and it's a specific client application, and it's going to connect to some application server and authenticate as itself. That could be something as simple as a Windows network credential. It could be a PIN. It could be a biometric. Whatever is specific to that client-server application will handle the authentication. So by the time the request makes it to the application server, it's already confirmed that John is the one authenticating using whatever means. That application server is then going to turn around and connect to Exchange Web Services, and it's going to use its own credential. In this case, it's using the service account of the application server. It could be configured to use an actual NT service account, but it's going to connect using its own credentials. So it doesn't have John's credentials, and it's using its own credentials no matter who's connecting to it. Exchange EWS running on the client access server is then going to turn around and verify that in this case, App Server 01 has rights, has an RBAC scope to access John's mailbox. If so, it's going to turn around and make that request to the backend store as though it were John. So whatever that operation is, whether it's simply looking at John's calendar data, whether it's sending a message on his behalf, that act will actually be performed as John. And then if there were any data coming back associated with it, it would all come back exactly as though John were requesting that data directly from Exchange. What are the slightly nuanced differences between delegate access and application impersonation look like in code? The key here is being able to specify an email address. In Exchange Web Services, we have two types of IDs. One is a well-known ID, and this is sort of a helper. If you know that you want to access the inbox, you don't want to worry about what the ID of that is. You just want to say, hey, give me the inbox. So in this case, we've said, I want the inbox, but if I didn't specify Bob at Contoso.com, it would actually give me Carrie's inbox. In this case, I'm using Carrie's credentials. So I'm actually going to quantify what inbox I'm talking about and say, OK, I want Bob's inbox. And then it's simply a folder bind operation to get the inbox. Application impersonation is nearly identical, except we're using the impersonating user ID. And that's basically saying all of the operations that happen on this request, I want it to act as though it were Bob at Contoso.com. So in this case, we don't need to qualify the inbox because we've already said everything in the context of this request will be as Bob at Contoso.com. Staying up to date. In Exchange Web Services, we originally had two options for notifications. We had a pull model and we had a push model. In Exchange 2010, we have since added a streaming notification model. The differences are pretty profound, actually, and so there's a clear answer where we're recommending people go, and I'll jump to it and tell you it's streaming notifications, but there are reasons why pull subscriptions and push subscriptions will work as well. Pull subscription was the original model where simply you define a subscription, and a subscription is a set of criteria. So it's a mailbox, it's a set of folders, and then it's a set of events that I care about. So I could say I want to look at all of the new items created on a calendar in Albert's calendar folder. And then I would only get notifications for that. But the model in that is I have to contact Exchange and say, do I have any new data? That's great if I only have to do it every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes. If I have to do it every 30 seconds, if the application demands are such that the end user needs to see it right away, or whatever the business logic is says, I can't wait to do it, you end up polling the Exchange server every 2 seconds or every 5 seconds, which ends up killing the Exchange server, and then your IT admin either is upset with you or the Exchange Online throttling will kick in. So then we said, okay, well, push subscriptions is the way to go. And push subscriptions, same thing. I'll set up a subscription. I'll define exactly what I care about. And then I'll give it a URL. And I'll say, every time an event gets triggered, just push it to this URL. Well, unfortunately, the complexities with setting up the URL and getting it managed, like if I was setting up an application and I said, okay, I want to register for push subscriptions, but I didn't have management access to the firewall, I would then have to go to the IT admin and say, oh, I need an inbound rule to allow traffic to this URL. And it ended up being a much more complicated management than we thought it was. And so we really kind of married the two of those and came up with streaming notifications. Streaming notifications uses the same subscription, so I define my criteria, and then I open a connection, and that connection can include one or more subscriptions. So in the case of a bulk mailbox management operation, I might say, here's a subscription for Bob, here's a subscription for Susan, and then I'm going to open up a connection to Exchange, and I'm going to say, give me events for these subscriptions, Bob's and Susan's. And Exchange is just going to hold on to that. And if you're familiar with Exchange ActiveSync or MSN Messenger, they use this term called a hanging get. And it's basically a long-lived HTTP get that says, just hold on to it if you don't have anything to tell me. So it's going to open up that connection, and Exchange will just park it until it has data. And so if that data is going to come 2 seconds later, or a minute later, or 5 minutes later, that connection's open and just sort of parked. But the data is going to come as fast as the events are firing. So you don't have to worry about increasing the poll interval, and you don't have to worry about managing the connections, because after the events come through, it will actually keep the connection open and just continue to stream events down as they happen. Every 30 minutes, that connection gets closed. You turn around and you reopen that connection, and that's just a way of ensuring that the connection hasn't become orphaned. So the client application is going to create a subscription request. Again, this is a mailbox, a set of folders, and a set of criteria that you care about. EWS, running on the client access server, is actually going to communicate to the back end, and it's going to say, okay, I'm building up what we call an event queue for this mailbox. And so the store is going to say, okay, every time I get events for these mailboxes, I'll send them up to the CAS server, and then the CAS server sort of manages all the different subscriptions. CAS server then sends back a subscription response, which includes the ID. So I could do this for n number of mailboxes if I needed to manage, or if I needed to monitor one mailbox or 20 mailboxes. I'm then going to open what we call the get streaming events request, and that's that hanging get. So the get streaming events event is going to connect up, it's going to authenticate, and then it's just going to park. Let's say there's some event that happens on store. I get that new item in the calendar folder I was worried about. Store is actually going to pump that data up to CAS. CAS is going to say, okay, which subscriptions are monitoring for this event, and then it's going to send the data back on the open pipe. Now, it's not going to close the pipe, as I said, so as that data continues to stream out from store, as there's more events created on the calendar, it's just going to continue to stream it back over that connection. When the connection's at rest, it's incredibly cheap for the client-side application to hold on to, and it's incredibly cheap for Exchange to hold on to. So IT admins are happy with it, and then the client-side developers get the benefit of being notified within seconds rather than trying to fine-tune that pull window of getting notified with enough delay but not enough, or not too little delay to avoid putting load on your Exchange server. Streaming events is only available in Exchange 2010. Exchange Online is, as part of the Office 365 brand, is all running Exchange 2010 SP1, so you don't need to worry about that. But if you are running on-premise deployments, you need to have SP1 to get the streaming notifications. As people start thinking more and more about the cloud and start thinking about what does it look like to move from a traditional deployment model where I have my Exchange server on-premise and I have my applications on-premise, we realize that it's not just one size fits all. You've heard multiple people from Microsoft talk about the hybrid cloud or talk about hybrid deployments. We don't believe that most customers are ready to switch whole hog going onto the cloud. Certainly some of the smaller companies or companies that are more tolerable of risk are going to do it right away. But there's this proving period where people say, okay, I want to dip my toe into it. So Exchange offers various types of sort of what we call toe dipping scenarios where you can move some of your mailboxes to the cloud, you can move some of your archives to the cloud to keep your mailboxes on premise. And so really that opens up an interesting paradigm about what does that mean for on-premise applications. Well, the on-premise applications can continue to run on-premise, whether that mailbox is in the cloud or on-premise if you're using Autodiscover. And if you move the applications to the cloud, as more and more third-party applications are now being built into the cloud, those can actually reach into your enterprise, again with the correct application impersonation setup. But you can continue to host your Exchange server on-premise, but get the benefit of hosted third-party applications. So it's really either or when we talk about the hybrid model. And then we talk about the pure cloud development, and this is where you've got all of your mailboxes hosted in Exchange Online, and you may have your apps running in Azure or Amazon EC2 or any of the other hosted app model. And in that case, it's pure cloud deployment. Nothing is running on Exchange on-premise. Again, and I don't want to belabor the point, but if you're using Autodiscover and you're using Exchange Web Services, your code won't have to change to make this transition. First two are all supported in Exchange 2007, SP1. Pure cloud deployment requires Exchange 2010, which is what we have running in the Office 365 / Exchange Online. So if you're transitioning from Exchange Online, there's a couple of things to think about. Again, Autodiscover is your URL discovery mechanism. That's consistent across the board. The authentication changes. Windows Integrated works for on-premise. In Exchange Online, we have integrated auth with Live ID, so the auth is slightly different there. Authorization, the delegate access model I talked about was available in Exchange 2007 and Exchange 2010, but the application impersonation was new in Exchange 2010. So if we've got it online, if you've got Exchange 2010 on-prem, it's going to be the exact same code running there. Throttling is an interesting thing that has existed in Exchange for quite some time, and it's not until recent that we sort of brought it to the mainstay. In Exchange 2007 and prior, we did store throttling, and nobody really knew about it, and it was sort of an internal protection feature that if Outlook was hammering the store too hard or there were too many client operations for the hardware profile, store would actually do some internal load management and kind of back people off. And so at the MAPI level, if you're familiar with MAPI programming, store was actually returning what we call a back-off to the client that was like, hey, go away for half a second or go away for 250 milliseconds. We've evolved that to what we call user-level throttling. And so user-level throttling is going to say that me as a mailbox has a quota of resources that I can use. And that quota can be defined as time accessing AD resources, time is accessing mailbox resources, or time just chewing up CPU cycles on the CAS server. So within an application, I need to worry about, A, if the disk starts to go bad, everybody on the system is going to get throttled, and I need to be able to handle it. And as an application developer, I need to be aware that any of the users that I'm accessing data on behalf of could potentially be throttled as well. And so we have, in Exchange Online, we have incredibly generous throttling limits. It's really there to prevent either malicious apps or what we call apps gone wild. If you have a bad app logic and you end up just spinning up too many threads or hammering Exchange Online, we'll take steps to protect ourselves. But it does mean that you will start to get a different request characteristics. And that can be as simple as us holding onto the request a little bit longer. Let's say Albert has 5 or 6 Mac Outlook clients connected all up to the same mailbox, and he's doing a bunch of testing. He's really doing more than a single user we think can do through using Exchange Web Services. His budget will get used up. Let's say he's doing a lot of really intensive store searches. So his time in mailbox is the budget construct that will get used. And once it goes into negative, the next time he makes that request, we'll hang on to it for 2 milliseconds, 3 milliseconds. We'll say, okay, we'll just slow him down a tiny bit. The majority of requests never get throttled, and the ones that do are on the order of 50 milliseconds or less. If you go over the top, like I said, if it's a malicious application or bad programming logic, we'll actually just start failing requests after a minute. So we'll hold on to the request for a minute, kind of assess a penalty, and then we'll just fail it and say, yep, timeout. Plan for throttling. Think about how your applications are going to access Exchange. Obviously, when you bring a client up, and let's say you're going to do a full client download, you're not going to be able to download a 5 gig mailbox in 2 minutes, serializing or parallelizing, 100 different requests against Exchange. So just think about the load on Exchange and be prepared for the once in a while case where applications do get throttled. And then the other thing is for third-party development, think about what your user credential story is, whether you're going to ask users for creds or work with IT admins to get the application impersonation set up beforehand.
With that, you hand off
With
to
that,
me.
there's Albert.
35 minutes for me. It's quite a bit longer than we expected. Anyhow, so the slogan of Microsoft is, we are all in. Well, I can tell you one thing. Link, when it comes to developers, is only half in. So if you have one takeaway of today, we are half into the cloud. When we are doing development against Link Online, what is important to realize is that there are actually two main APIs that we are talking about. On the client side, you have effectively APIs that talk to an executable that is running on the desktop, which is called communicator.exe. Under the hood, it's still called Link in, of course, all the branding. And because it's talking to that client, Link Online does not really know that it's actually a Link Online client or an on-prem client. The client is the same. So when it comes to development of applications that actually use the APIs of the client-side API, of the Link 2010 managed API, anything that was possible is also possible against Link Online. Besides that client API, there is also a server-side API, which is called the Unified Communications Managed API. This Unified Communications Managed API is used by many server roles in Link Server. It's also used, for example, by Exchange. It's also used by various other products inside Microsoft. But this is a server-side API. Now, if you're looking at a server-side API, and in order to configure that against Link Server, there is all kinds of steps that you need to do in order to provision applications. You need to create, essentially, an application identity, an application pool. And Link Online, that's to say Office 365, does not provide any tools to actually connect to the Link Online environment, run all those PowerShells, and actually create that application ID that you will need in order to build applications on the Unified Communications Managed API. So what I said just a second ago, when we're talking about Link Online development, we are talking very much about client-side development because we are only half in. I will come back to the other API in the end of my presentation because there are workarounds. So when we are talking about developing against the Link 2010 managed API, there are essentially 4 things that you can do with it. And those 4 things are, you can try, essentially take a look at the Link client and puzzle that Link client apart in all kinds of UI controls. For each and every one of those UI elements, like for example, if I pull up Link, I do not know if it's still running here. Let's actually see. Yeah. Here, for example, we've got Lene, and you've got here what we call my status. Or my presence area. So this is everything that I have. This is an UI element. If you have a contact card, so if I, oh, sorry, that's the wrong one. I should click on this one. Let me click on this. This is the contact card. So if I pin this, I should be able to move it around, but not in this PowerPoint. Okay, so then you can see everything that is around the contact card. This is a UI control. And in Visual Studio, and I'm going to show you that in a second, we have effectively provided controls for each and every one of those thingies. So for example, if you would like to send mail, there is a control to send a mail. There's a start an instant message to do a call. All those have been rolled up in Visual Studio controls that you actually can integrate into your application. So that's the first thing that you actually can do with the Link 2010 managed API. You can integrate whatever you see in the Link client inside your application. There's one caveat that you need to be aware of. At the moment that you actually start a conversation by clicking on one of those elements, like for example, start an instant message, because it is communicator.exe running under the hood, at that very moment, the link will actually pop up the conversation window, its own conversation window on top of your application. Now, there are tricks that we actually have documented on how to dock that conversation window inside your application, but you have to realize that it's actually the Lync client that is running. But still, number one thing you can do with the Lync 2010 managed API with the SDK that we are shipping is use those controls, and they are both available in WPF as well as in Silverlight, and embed those UI elements inside your own application. The second thing that you can do is once you start talking about unified communications, one of the big realizations is that we are not only talking here about instant messages, we are not only talking about being able to do a voice or video call, but essentially we have a data pipe through which we can communicate data about the application, about what we are communicating about, from one participant to the other participant. And I'm going to show you that in a demo as well in a second, but the effect of that is that you are able to send XML blobs from one side of a participant through a secure channel that we have to the other side, and then in your application logic, you can unpack that XML blob, and actually, for example, like there is a partner called Dassault. Dassault has a 3D modeling software, and they can actually control their 3D modeling software on either side of the communicating parties. So one person rotates a picture, it sends the coordinates of that picture that just has rotated to the other side, and then at that very moment, the other side will rotate as well. So you can contextualize conversations in the sense that you can send information across that same wire that is also used for instant messages and voice. Then there are a whole set of capabilities, well, not too many, but there are a set of capabilities that we have in order to enhance Lync. The most important one is what we call the conversation window extension. And again, I will show that in a second in a demo, but what you need to realize is that there is a hidden window on the right-hand side of this instant message window. So if I open an instant message, for example, with Contact Center, I see here on the right-hand side, this is a Contact Center demo that we did in another session, I can see that there is a whole console that is built into the Lync client, into the conversation window, in which I actually have programmatic control. So I can, for example, in this case, press this button, leave, and because this is Silverlight that is running inside that conversation window extension, I can actually give the command to leave a conversation via code from this extension window into the main window of Lync and be able to control the communications from within there. So that is one way of how you can actually extend the Lync capabilities that we have in this conversation window. Another capability is if you have, and let me pop it up again, if you have the drop-down here of what are the things that you have available, this list of the capabilities that we have here are customizable. And I will show you that a partner of us, for example, has built in how you can send an instant message to a specific recipient. So that list is also customizable. And the last part is that if you do not like the user interface of Lync, of the Lync client, you can actually build on top of that managed API, you can build your own user interface. Now, the one thing that is actually then missing at that very moment is that you cannot do application sharing, but you can do instant messaging, you can do voice, and you can do video. Let's go a little bit more into detail. I spoke about that we are effectively offering UI controls inside Visual Studio. Those are built for a template for WPF, which also, by the way, can be integrated into WinForms, as well as in Silverlight. There's one big gotcha. When you are using Silverlight, and this is maybe not the message that you would like to hear, it only runs in Internet Explorer. It doesn't run in anything else. And that is because of this whole link that we have to actually allow that data model to actually communicate with the Lync client. So it is when we are talking about Silverlight, it is particularly tailored only for Internet Explorer. And it's therefore not really a reach scenario in the sense that you could build a client that actually is running across different platforms. For that, you would use the server-side API in a web service. I will come back to that in a moment again as well. So let's actually do a very quick mini demo, and you have to bear with me here a little bit. I have number C. because I'm really doing a remote desktop into a remote desktop into a remote desktop because of some network issues that we have. I cannot reach the server. So here's the second remote desktop. Come on. Here we go. And I will pop up Visual Studio. My server broke down, so I have to do this like this. You can here inside Visual Studio actually start a new project. And when you start a new project, there are two templates after you have installed the Lync SDK, one for Silverlight and one for WPF. And you can, once you start that project, you can see a little window that pops up. And you have here on the left-hand side those UI controls, those Visual Studio controls that we have. So for example, if I would like to have an email button, send email button, this is the one. But let's actually do my status area. So I'm going to drag and drop my status area in here. This is maybe not the smartest what I could have done. Hello. What is happening today? Today my window is not big enough. I should have made this window a little bit bigger. And now it's very slow because it's... And let's actually delete this one, which was in there already. OK, so I've got here my status control. If I would now like to have, for example, my contact list, where's the contact list? At this very moment, I can put the contact list underneath. And now I need to resize, which is very slow. Window a little bit so that you can see a little bit at least of the contact list. And I'm pretty sure that you know exactly how to do this so that it nicely aligns. And here we have this one. We nicely align this one as well. Drag and drop controls that typically in a few lines of code can actually provide you a similar experience as what you have in Lync. So here it's running in its own window. If I now pop up the Lync client of this particular user, you can see it is here. This is the real Lync, and this is what it could look like inside your application. If I look at the contact list, so here's other contacts. I can see the administrator. I can see the help desk. This is here. If I would add a contact here, so for example, I add Lena A, and I add this person, and I add it to all contacts. Here's Lena. And I can do exactly the same here if I would have inserted a search bar as well. So in other words, with drag and drop, you can actually insert those UI elements of Lync inside your own application. End of this demonstration. Now, this is something that can be done and take a view that is looking very different, right? So, for example, this is a partner of ours called Med1, and they've got the hospital medical records. And in this hospital medical records, they are not displaying the contact list as it is for your normal buddy list in your Lync client, but it's actually a contact list that is made context sensitive. So we have also a control, which is actually a contact list that is actually able to be bound to a list of contacts that you specify in another source. In this case, it's the care team. And the care team of this particular patient actually is then displayed in that contact list. The next demo that I would like to do is how you actually can transmit that context to the other side. So when we are talking about Silverlight, very often those are line of business applications. And what you see in a moment is that in this particular application, there is a window that pops up on the right-hand side in the conversation window extension that is essentially transmitting data of your intranet website. So in this case, it's the status about a particular project, City and Light and Power. And that information is available then right there on the other side of the user so that the other user does not need to open the application, but really can see what you're talking about right from the start. Let's actually demonstrate that as well. And I closed my browser, so I have to do a little bit of a trick. Forget about this. Here's the proposal tracker. Here we are. So So here at this very moment, actually I am connected to this particular application. So you can see here I'm actually having my status set to do not disturb, and that's exactly the same as what I have in my Link client as well. And I can change that. I have a little utility here to do that. So for example, if I would like to publish myself in a live meeting, or for example, I can set myself to sleeping. You can see that whatever I set as the presence inside my client, even if I reset it here to reset, it actually will become exactly available here as well. So that is the My Persona control built into this line of business application. You can also see that there is this list of all the different contacts that is an exact copy, like I showed just a second ago, of the one that I have over here. So these are my buddies that appear here, and whoever logs into this application will actually see their own buddies, and this is not something that you need to code or need to hardwire. But now the interesting part comes when you actually start talking about this contextual information that you would like to transmit. In this particular case, there is an application here where I have a particular project with a sponsor and with a proposal team. And when I would like to actually start a conversation, in this case, I would like to actually start an instant message, and it always pops up behind this week. For me, this is not normal behavior, but on my computer it does it. And I say hi. At this very moment, I actually communicate with the guy on the other side. How may I help you? Well, what is about budget? So we're actually coming under budget. How may I help you? Well, let me say goodbye. I'm actually talking to a bot now to not have a demo buddy to be signed up. But what is the cool thing is that if you're talking about the communications, I could actually change data in here, and on the other side of the communication, on the side of Anders, he would see exactly the same as what I see here. Now, this is a capability that you have programmatic access that you can send back and forth that also can be used for other purposes. One of the purposes that I called out when I was doing the Link session was, for example, where you can do approvals or digital signatures or those type of things. So you can have an IM. You can have then this conversation window extension, display what needs to be approved, and you can press a button and you can digitally sign or you can approve a project right from within Communicator, right from within the Link client, without having to log into an application that actually provided that whole context about that. You can do a mini snapshot here right within this application. So you can see here how all these elements have been integrated. This is running in my browser, so this is all Silverlight. You can see the look and feel is almost the same, so it's maybe not that exact pitch, but it's the same type of stuff, and you can move it around, and you can see the data that you have about this particular user, etc. And you can, of course, close it as well. So let's go back to the slide. This was a demo that also ships inside the SDK. Now, how you can actually use this can be in many, many different ways. One of the ways, for example, that our partners are using this for or have built products around is to log time. So whenever you have an incoming call or an incoming instant message, when you are in the business, for example, of being a lawyer, at that very moment when you are a lawyer, you need to charge every project to a particular thing. And in this particular case, you actually can, whenever the conversation comes up, open up this conversation window so that the person does not need to memorize afterwards, what did I spend my time on, but can immediately clock or select the project that they are working on. And in this particular case, they actually have an application in which they can also have the manager approve or reject timesheets. So because you have programmatic access through this Silverlight application to a backend, to applications that are running in the background, you can actually extend the experience of Link with your own experience, with your own line of business scenario. Another example that I mentioned earlier is that you can actually customize the drop-down that comes when you are talking or selecting one or multiple people inside your contact list. So when I am popping up the communicator here, and I would select 3 users, and I would right-click them, these 2 users that I just selected, and I would like to start a conference call, I can just as well, and that's what is done here by a company called Geomant, send them all a text message. So based on the telephone data, the mobile data that you have, they have got built an application that sends SMSs, but they pass on the data of the user in the contact list to that application that they have built on how to send an SMS, And they are able to customize that menu that comes in Link and are able to actually display that right way. And with that, you are actually doing a lot more sophisticated stuff. Now, one of the examples that we have shipped as part of our adoption kit, of the Link adoption kit, is a translator. And it's downloadable under this link, linguisticcloudapp.net. It's a translator. So let me actually demonstrate that. So here I've got my application. Let me see if I've got the Leebot. So again, to save myself from. Now, if I am a Dutch-speaking person, I actually have extended all those applications here on the right-hand side. So in this particular case, I've got a conversation translator. I also have linguistic loaded. Let me actually start the conversation translator because the UI is a little bit simpler. And I can speak Dutch, and they can speak English. Now, Dutch people also say hi, so let's actually say hi as well. It now translates it in English, and it goes there. Now, at this very moment, the bot is actually going to respond to me, how may I help you? And it's translated then in Dutch. Hoe kan ik u helpen? And if I then say, for example, I of course need to speak Dutch. If I say verkoop, which translates into sales, you can say, okay, sales are up by 52 cents. Or if I say weer, which means weather, I can say, but you can see how there is a whole extension built in, a whole small mini application. You can think also of similar applications that have been built for Windows Live Messenger or how to play chess, because you can send data back and forth. Not only data back and forth between the two participants, but also data to a web service, and then post that information back from the web service into your application, and then pass it on. In this case, the translator is not built into Link itself. The translator is actually the Bing or Google web service that you bind to, and you send the data to the web service, you get the data back, and at that very moment you can pass it still there. So now the bot is getting a little bit, let me see. I have to say goodbye. And then it actually send it over. Goodbye. And then it's end of the demo. But this is how you can actually extend the functionality of Link by a whole mini application that is inside the application. Now, many people are very happy with how we have built our UI. But there is, of course, always use cases in case people are not happy. I still remember on the previous client, OCS 2007 R2, which was all blue, and we went to a big retailer that competed very strongly against blue, the Walmart, and they wanted to have another color than blue. They wanted to have red, and they wanted us actually to retemplate. Well, can't we just change the color? Now, you cannot do that in the Link client as we ship it, but when you are talking about those UI controls that you have, you actually can change the UI controls and retemplate them and make them different colors, make them different icons, and really be able to reshape your application. I do not have a good example of that myself as a demo to demonstrate, but this is actually a very funny one, because these people have rebuilt Link on top of a Link that is running under the hood with a UI that might seem very familiar if you're knowing the Windows Phone 7. But here you can see that the UI is not adopting exactly the controls as we ship them. They have built their own templates for the UI controls. They have built their own way on how to actually display messages, etc. Now, a very often asked for use case scenario is, for example, if you start building different UIs that, for example, are optimized for touch. In this particular case, here we are talking about a terminal that is built by a partner called FTEX. And this terminal is a video terminal. So you can imagine that you're in a bank, and in a bank there might not always be every type of expert for every type of loan or every type of financial advice available in the bank. But they might be available in the back office. Now, the fact alone that you can actually build an ATM-like terminal, it's like a PC, a touch screen PC. And you can walk up to it, and you can actually start a conversation in the privacy of that booth that you have there with someone in the back office that is using purely Link as their client. you can actually connect customers to those real experts using a rather touch-friendly user interface. So in other words, in this particular case, you can actually see that there are buttons. You can press those buttons on the user interface. Then you are getting connected. And you will be able to have a video call with an expert that is actually not in the branch itself, but it's in the back office. So this is a way of how you actually can suppress the UI of the Lync user interface, because that communicator.exe executable is still running under the hood. There's, however, a registry setting that you set in order to suppress the UI, but you still can actually do all the things that you can do with Lync. Apart, I said, from application sharing, which will come in a later release, but it is not available at this very moment. Then on top of the model API, which is even one level deeper, so just a second ago we just suppressed the UI, you also can actually build your own client from ground up. Again, it runs the executable still in the background, but you can build your own application. And here there's effectively just a managed API, and you can see what are the functionalities that are available. And those functionalities actually offer you a way to build applications, both both for 32-bit as for 64-bit, but in the communicator.exe is always 32-bit. So these were actually the demos and the things that I wanted to say about Lync. Lync, when you're doing Lync custom development in Office 365, Office 365 doesn't know that it's actually Lync not for on-prem or online. It doesn't know. So the application always talks to the Lync client by itself. And when it talks only to the Lync client by itself, therefore, the Lync client actually also does everything around throttling, everything around protection of the online environment. So the buffers of defense are built into the client. And therefore, whatever application you have built on top of the Lync client actually will run against Office 365. Now, why am I telling this story around the security and that it's actually handled by the Lync client? Is because when we are talking about server-side applications, the API that we are using for server-side applications, the Unified Communications Managed API, does not have such protection built in. It has some protection built in, but it does not have all the types of protection built in. And the other thing which is very important to realize is that the Unified Communications Managed API also uses all kinds of port ranges and all kinds of control that actually is, at this very moment, not compatible with a hosting environment like, for example, Windows Azure. So when we started building the Wave 14, the 2010 release of Lync, we had the choice of, okay, hey, what can we do around development? What can we do around server-side development against Office 365? And what is important to realize is that we essentially took the decision, well, if you would like to build server-side applications, there will need to be a second Lync server that is outside of the cloud. And that second Lync server, I will illustrate that in a second in a diagram, that second Lync server can be federated then with the Lync online environment that you would like to serve the application for, but it cannot be hosted inside any of the Microsoft properties. So you as a partner or as a customer will need to host a second domain. You will need to host a second Lync server. And on top of that Lync server, you will need to provision Unified Communications Managed API applications. So the concept of federation is extremely important. Let me show you how that works. Oh, now there's a small build because of that. So this was not intended. So if you're talking about the Office 365 environment and you have all your servers, Exchange, SharePoint, Lync in there, it effectively is the Lync online server that needs to have a federated trust. So you need to open up federation with a second domain of a Lync server that is on-prem somewhere in a data center of your own or of your partner. And that server then allows to communicate with the application. Through the trust that you establish through federation, you are able to actually build your Unified Communications Managed API applications, and you are able to run them in your own data center, and you are then able to run, for example, a contact center application, or you're able to run a notifications application, or you're able to run an application that does an expert search. So it is not possible to run those applications in Office 365. We are only half in that sense. And in the moment that you do this, all the handling of effectively the security and the handling of your, let's say, robustness of your application, the hardening of your application, is actually able only to attack the link server that you have in your on-prem environment. So this is how we actually recommend that people who would need this type of applications that are server-side in order to do things like, for example, web chat, expert search, contact center, interactive voice response, query response bots, outbound notifications, alerts and notifications, surveys. Those type of applications are running away from, separated from the Office 365 cloud. Nevertheless, you can still do all the powerful stuff that you can do in the Unified Communications Managed API. But this is the important thing to realize that, like I said in the very beginning, when we are talking about link development, we are only half in. Now, there are two other APIs that I have not mentioned before. Those two other APIs, one is all around PowerShell. I spoke to you about that when you're provisioning Unified Communications Managed API applications, you actually need to run a few PowerShells to actually make the application be recognized by the link server. Now, not only that PowerShell does not run against the Office 365 environment, but there is no remote PowerShell like Exchange has at this very moment for Link Online. Now, this is something that is definitely on our roadmap to actually enable partners to build, for example, nice provisioning tools using PowerShell for Link. But at this very moment, the only thing that we're offering is something which I do not know what the abbreviation stands for, but it's called MOSI, which is essentially the Microsoft Online provisioning environment. And we do not offer PowerShell directly to Link at this very moment. Now, there's a second type of applications that are very important as well for our customers that are currently not enabled in the Link Online environment. And those have to do with what we call effectively messages that are in flight. So we've got a language, a SIP processing language, or MS-SPL, that allows you to control which people can communicate with which people and what is the content of the messages that are going across the wire. So this is a very, very powerful paradigm that you actually can intercept and modify any message that goes in there and, for example, do things like virus control, but also do things like ethical walls, do things like filter out all kinds of curse words. Those type of things are possible in this Microsoft SIP processing language. However, there is, at this very moment, in Link Online, no capability to actually provision those scripts in the Link Online environment. So at this very moment, this is the situation as it is. We are, of course, working on enhancing the functionalities, but these are the gotchas when we are talking about Office 365 development and Link. Everything client-side works because the client actually takes care of abstracting it away. You see Managed API can work, made to work with Federation, and the PowerShell and Microsoft Processing Language, or the Managed API of the server, those can actually not be run in the online environment. Okay, these are your resources. There's a whole bunch of information available, especially around Exchange, on the Exchange portal. There's a series of articles, 11 articles that we are publishing at the moment. They also focus on things like the notifications more in detail, the things like archiving, etc. So I recommend you most of all go to those MSDN web pages. Before I open for question and answer, I would like to urge you to fill out your evaluation form, because we only are allowed to come back if you give us good feedback. And I thereby would like to thank you and open up the floor for questions and answers. Any questions? So the question is, if you do if you take a look at the Microsoft SIP processing language, would there be a model as well where you can actually do SIP processing language through a federated model? And the answer is actually no. The control that the SIP processing language has is only over the actual domain of the users that are homed on that particular server. You literally need to install it, therefore, on the front end of that particular server. So unfortunately, it's not possible at this point in time. We are thinking about how to enable this, but at this very moment, it's not possible. Go ahead.
The Silverlight control, can I use it for audio video in the browser?
The question is, if I would like to audio and video in the browser, can I use the Silverlight controls? The answer is no. The answer is no and yes. Let me actually start with the yes. It is possible if you have communicator XE loaded. So if you're using the Silverlight controls, implied is already that you can you have loaded communicator XE, because otherwise those controls do not run. But at that very moment, when you actually start an audio-video control, it is actually popping up the communicator XE. It's popping up that client, and therefore is no longer a Silverlight application. What many people are asking us is, can we do audio and video? Can we do audio and video right from within the browser? And this is something that is very high on my wish list, and it's definitely going to come, because I'm a very persistent person in that sense. But at this very moment, it's not possible. So there are some people who have found that there are hacks how you can do that. There's namely in the UC managed API, there's a private namespace and there's a public namespace. And in the private namespace, all those classes are enabled. But in the public namespace, they are not. So at this very moment, it's not supported. And if you find the workaround, you will need to use the server-side API actually on the client. So that is how people build an ActiveX or a Firefox plugin or a Chrome plugin. And they essentially wrap those DLLs in there that are the server-side UC managed API DLLs and use private APIs. It will come. Be aware. Do we have people working on Linux? In the session that we did around the Unified Communications Managed API, and this is not specific for Office 365, what we showed is how you can turn the Unified Communications Managed API into a web service, very similar to when we go back to Exchange 2007, where you actually have those, you build a web service on top of a managed API, for example, through proxies and so on. If you build that web service, and by the way, there is a sample on Codeplex called UCMA 3.0 REST sample, which is a REST web service. You can actually use that functionality, and you can build your client in whatever language. The actual sample that those people have implemented on top of that REST sample is, by the way, something that we are going to ship as well, but is, for example, a Windows Phone 7 client. So they essentially, what you can do in that Windows Phone 7 client in the videos that they have uploaded there, that is what you can do when you're using web. Now, the big question, coming back to the other question that we had just a second about audio and video. Audio and video, given the fact that it takes a dependency both on devices as well as on the codecs that are doing the transcoding, they are not enabled for Linux. We do not have a media stack that actually runs on a Linux box. So the functionality that you have when you're doing Linux development is very much around the presence, instant messaging, contact management, call control, those type of things. And they are not allowing you to do audio and video. Any more questions? We actually are at the end of our time. Thank you very, very much. And yeah, like I said, give us some feedback, what we can do better, what we should continue to do. And if you have any further questions, we will be around for another 15 minutes. So let us know. Thank you.